Again, let me say we're glad that you're with us this morning, and we are so appreciative for your service, for all that you do for us. As we sing that song, Mansion in Heaven, I don't know about you, but we all speculate about what heaven's going to be like, don't we? We wonder about things, about that mansion, about how life is going to be. I heard a story the other day about two fellows that were real good friends that loved baseball. And they loved to play baseball. As a matter of fact, one was a pitcher, the other was a catcher. And so Jim and John always talked about baseball. And they brought up this point one day. They said, you wonder, would there be any baseball in heaven? And didn't know. Well, they hoped that there would be. And so the catcher, John, soon after this discussion, got sick and died. And his friend, that was the pitcher, he was just so deflated about his dear friend dying. And one day he was in the car driving along thinking about his friend, and he hears this voice, and he's saying, Jim. And he listened, Jim. And sure enough, it is his friend. And his friend said, I know I've passed away, but I've got good news and bad news. And Jim says, well, great, what is the good news? He says, there is baseball in heaven. And he says, that's wonderful. What's the bad news? You're scheduled to pitch tomorrow afternoon. So, it can be kind of tough on you, can't it? But, we think about heaven. What a wonderful place that it would be. Today I want to talk just for a little while about thanking our first responders. I want to begin by going over to Romans chapter 13 and reading just a few verses. Romans chapter 13. Paul is writing to a church that is in the capital city of the Roman Empire. And so you can just imagine just how patriotic these people would have been. And listen to what he says now. He says, every person is to be in subjection to the government authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. You realize that our government exists because God wants it to exist. And I firmly believe that as a Christian, it is our responsibility. It is one of our top priorities is to honor and to show the authority that governments have. And this is vital and important. And he says, every authority is there because of God. Now in verse 2, he says, therefore, okay, so our government, at whatever level, it is there. And our public servants, because, governments, that's kind of a vague thing, but public servants, that's where it's human-to-human contact. And Paul says, now, with that in mind, let me tell you what that means. Whoever resists authority is opposed to the ordinance of God, and they that are opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will be praised for the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for doers not bear the sword for nothing. It does not bear the sword for nothing, for it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings forth or brings wrath on the ones who practices evil. Therefore, it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but for a conscience sake. For because of this, you also pay taxes for rulers and servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. And then notice verse 7. Render to all what is due to them. Tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Now here he tells us how to be a good citizen. It doesn't matter what country in the world you live in. These are some great rules of how to be a good citizen. And this morning, as we honor our public servants, God says, I have placed them there. You guys who work in the law enforcement area, I bet you've been called a lot of things, but you've never been called a minister. But you are. He says, for they are the ministers that carry out my ordinances. You realize civilization, when God created man, and we have the church, we have the institution of marriage, the institution of the church, institution of society or civilization. And God played a role in all of these things because he doesn't want chaos, but he wants it for the further and the betterment of people. He wants things to get better. And he says, therefore, render honor. Render the taxes that need to be paid. He says, because fire trucks cost money. You say, well, we don't see fire trucks here. We can understand maybe a policeman, but Jerry Clower says, and I love this story, he says that firemen, they're biblical. He said, as a matter of fact, the wise men that visited Jesus after his birth were firemen. And someone, well, how do you get that? He says, well, it says they came from afar. So he, I guess, in just kind of southern country humor, we can see that anything where there's a shield that is involved, a badge that is involved, there is authority behind that. And what does that mean? That means we respect them. That means whenever we're talking to them, we talk to them with respect. We do what they say do. It does not mean arguing with them. It does not mean running from them. It does not mean trying to fight them. And young people, I know that today we have a lot of movements in our country that are saying, well, if you don't agree with anything, then just oppose it with whatever you want to. That's not right. That's not true. You find yourself in big trouble when you start opposing the authority that we just read about right here. This is ultimate authority. And they have that. And we need to make sure that we teach our children and we ourselves act the right way. You remember I told you the story about a friend of mine that was up at Mall of America, and he ran through a stop sign. It was snowing, and a fella came over and was talking to him, and he could have been real ugly to him because he felt like he was unjustly being ticketed because he said, it was snowing so hard I didn't see the stop sign and I ran through it. And he says, I was just thinking, he went to his car and he got in the car and he ran the tag and he came back and he was talking to him and he was just thinking, boy, when he gets back, I'm just going to give him just a piece of my mind about the way he's treating me. And he said, but he called out the corner of his eye his 8-year-old son that was sitting there taking everything in. And he said, here's a great opportunity for me to teach a good lesson. And when the officer got back, yes, sir, I'm sorry I did that. Yes, I'll take the ticket. I'm not going to have any problems. He said, I wanted to teach that boy. That boy today is grown and is a very law-abiding, responsible adult. But you see, what if his daddy had gave that policeman a piece of his mind? He felt justified in doing that. Whether he was or not, I don't know. But you see, he went that extra mile of rendering honor where honor is due, where benefit of a doubt, he gave it. And that's the same thing that we should do. The Bible is really big on public servants, those who serve. As a matter of fact, if you turn to Hebrews chapter 11, you're going to find a section. Of course, we call this kind of the great roll call of faith because it talks about men like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and these guys that were great spiritual leaders. But when you get down to verse 32, let me just read these verses to you and listen to this list of people. And what more? These are people of faith. He says, what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, of Barak, of Samson, of Jephthah, of David, of Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, and shut the mouths of lions. You know what all these men right here have in common? Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. You know what they all have in common? They're public servants. Every one of them served their country in some way. As leaders, as warriors, as judges, as enforcers, they helped those. And I know there are people that need to keep watch. As a matter of fact, in Nehemiah chapter 4, as Nehemiah has this task of rebuilding Jerusalem. Jerusalem had been in ruins for over 70 years, and you could imagine what it looked like where nature was just taking it back. And Nehemiah had the task of rebuilding the walls around this once great city and rehanging all of the gates. And there were those who opposed him. There were men named Sanballat and another man by the name of Tobiah, another man by the name of Gershom. And they all criticized. And they all tried to stop the work that Nehemiah was doing, to the point that Nehemiah in chapter 4, verse 8 and 9, placed guards. And these guards were there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to ensure the safety and that the work could go on. You see, God says there are times when we need people who stand watch. They stand guard, whether it be police protection, whether it be fire protection, whether it be protection by the call of someone coming and helping us with a health issue, whether it be taking care of our penal system, our prisons. We need these folks. God recognizes that, and God even incorporated that in His own kingdom as well. And so there are those who stand watch, and God commissions them to stand watch, and we need to hold up their hands that they can do the best job that they can and that they feel good about what they're doing because of the folks that they are helping and watching over. You know, over in John chapter 1, verses 40 and 41, as we close out our lesson this morning, I am so reminded of a fellow by the name of Andrew. You know, Andrew is only mentioned a few times in the Bible, but you know, every time he is mentioned, he's doing one thing. He is bringing somebody to Jesus. And he says to his brother, to Peter, he says, we have found the Messiah. We have found the Messiah. That ought to be the goal of every one of us in our lives, is to find the Messiah. Today, Jesus can touch our lives. He can heal our lives. He can help us to be better at whatever endeavorment we have. He can help us to be better people, better neighbors, better servants, better citizens, better husbands, better wives, better parents. And so let me encourage you, if you're here this morning and you have not found the Messiah, you need to seek Him. You need to find Him. You need to place your faith in Jesus. As Craig prayed just a moment ago, as we was listening and following along with him, and how very eloquently he spoke concerning the fact that only in Jesus is their salvation. It does not rest in myself, because I fall so short. But I put my faith in Him and my trust in Him. And I'm willing to repent of my sins, confess Jesus, and be buried with Him in baptism. That I then become a child of God. And by that faith in Him, I live for Him the rest of my life. Doesn't mean I'm going to be sinless and perfect. It means, though, that when I make the mistake and I fall down, I'm going to get right back up and I'm going to keep going, because I know I'm in the grace of God and I'm abiding in Him. And so this morning, we say to all those that are our public servants, thank you very much, you first responders, for putting your life on the line for us. You know, last night I went to sleep. I didn't think about a robbery breaking in. I didn't think about my property being destroyed. I didn't think about my health, that what if something happened, somebody couldn't get to me and help me. I didn't think about my house burning down. I didn't think about, you know why? Because of you folks. And thank you very much for that. We appreciate that so very much. If you're here this morning and you need to put your faith in Jesus and obey him. Won't you do that while together we stand and sing?